So on stage here at the RFF 2025, Michael, it's an absolute privilege to have you with us to hear a little bit more about this very exciting project. Why don't you kick off? I mean, I don't know if there's anyone in this room who won't know what New Murabba is and what the project's all about, but why don't you start by telling everybody a little bit about this extraordinary thing?
Thank you, Miriam. So New Murabba is going to be a unique place. It's positioned in probably the most prime part of Riyadh in terms of real estate, which is the northwest corner. It's immediately above Al Malka and close to Diriyah. We have 19 square kilometers, and the 19 square kilometers of the estate will be developed in such a way that we give over half of the physical landmass to green space and to mobility. And the other half of the space will be given over to all kinds of real estate that either does or doesn't exist in Riyadh today. I think what makes New Murabba particularly unique is that we will be creating the world's largest modern downtown. So with that, it means a city that is born smart. It means a place which has mid and high rise introduced to Riyadh, which is not something that's commonplace today, and it will create the most amazing place for people to live, work, and play.
Well, I've been very excited about the things I've read about it, researched about it. I think it is the most extraordinary innovation that's going on here. So I'd love to take our time together on stage to talk a bit more about why you're doing it, what it means for this incredible community, and some of the interesting things that are going into the planning and design phases of New Murabba and where we're at with it all. You're a total seasoned professional, Michael. You have over, I mean, dare I say, 37 years of experience. I mean, that does, I mean, maybe I should say decades, but then that makes maybe it sound even worse. So you have extensive experience in leading global transformation projects. And you've been here now in leading New Murabba for, I believe, just over a year. What was it that made you want to come and lend your talents and expertise to this particular project?
Well, look, firstly, I would say it's a privilege to be here. And for me, I guess in life, I tend to walk towards challenges rather than shy away from them. And I think what you want to try to do in anything that you pursue is to actually make a difference. And when New Murabba was first suggested to me 2 years ago, it caught my attention because, one, the vision and the direction in which the Crown Prince has set out for Vision 2030 was very compelling, firstly. It was tangible, it was real, rather than words. And in particular, the prospect of making a difference to what is an amazing city already in Riyadh, and to make that amazing city even more amazing, and to leave your mark and to help the kingdom as I pass through over hopefully many, many years, to actually leave something which will stand the test of time for generations to come, was an irresistible challenge.
Well, I'm very grateful and very glad that you're part of it, because I believe that there have been some significant progress and developments under your leadership, so we'll come on to those a little bit later. But you just mentioned Vision 2030, and New Murabba is much more, isn't it, than just a real estate project, and it's absolutely aligned with supporting those goals around Vision 2030. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the contributions and the alignment that New Murabba is making to realizing Vision 2030?
Of course, yeah. I think firstly, in terms of enriching and improving the quality of life, we know that's a really important aspect of Vision 2030. And by its very nature, New Murabba's gesture in terms of actually, as I said already, giving over half of the physical landmass to the ability for people to actually enjoy green space. If you look at the green space in New Murabba, it's the equivalent of about 2.4 times Central Park in New York. But the difference is you don't have to walk to the top of Manhattan to get to it. It's all around you. And it's effectively modeled on the existing network of the wadis. So it has this beautiful topography, but also it's anchored very much around the macabre, which we should come back to later. So I think quality of life is important. We have a philosophy in New Murabba that is anchored on 15-minute communities. So we actually have 18 communities on the entire estate. We'll be developing out 14 of those in our first 3 phases. And the thing about the communities are that they truly are communities that have everything that people need to live, work, and play. Everything is within a 15-minute walking distance. And the particularly nice thing is actually you can step almost out of the back of each community onto something called the Darb. And the Darb is an 11-kilometer continuous vehicle-free route, which enables people to walk, to exercise, just to take in the amazing assets within New Murabba, but also just to experience the place. those are sort of key aspects, but above and beyond that, actually creating sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion are also massive elements of Vision 2030, which I believe we're bringing to life at Murabba. One of the strong ambitions that we have when we think about outcomes is to actually take the already amazing energy of young Saudis, and we are so blessed to have them, who are seriously intelligent, well-traveled, and actually want to create something special.
Yes.
So the ability for me to actually play my part in helping young, talented Saudis to get to where they want to be and where they can be and should be is also appealing. And then finally, the economic stimulus that Murabba will create. Upon full completion, when all three phases are built out, we're talking about 400,000 people living in Murabba. We're talking about tens of millions of people visiting Muqab every year. And we're talking about a whole economy that will not be separate from Riyadh. I think the important thing to say is Murabba is part of Riyadh. It's not a separate city, it's not a separate place, but it will just be an extension of an already great city, and hopefully will enable the city to thrive for many generations to come.
Oh, it's an extraordinary ambition, and I love some of the things you've mentioned around leveraging local young talent, allowing people to have that opportunity to embed their history, heritage, legacy into the construction of something that is new, but is still going to be a nod to those things. You've also mentioned the concept of 15-minute cities, which I think we've heard a lot about over the last few days, but I know that you have a really big ambition around New Murabba becoming one of the top 10 most livable cities here. What does that mean in real terms? What can an urban dweller, what can somebody visiting New Murabba expect to see that will make it this idea of a truly livable city? Tell us more about that.
So I think firstly there's something which I guess in terms of the myths and legends for people that haven't been to the kingdom or don't spend time in the kingdom to understand that actually Riyadh is already a very livable city, actually. What do I mean by that? Firstly, the climate today. It's actually cold, and for the last 6 to 8 weeks, I've felt cold. And I'm from London, and
You're
I feel
not
cold
a true Brit, then, if you've been cold.
So firstly, the city here is already livable. There are probably 3 months of the year where it gets particularly hot, but even in that time, it's livable. And the reason it's livable is because Riyadh, over generations through its heritage, has created unique aspects in the city. I'm talking about shading, I'm talking about space where communities can thrive, but privacy can coexist as well. So we're trying to take a lot of the heritage of Riyadh today and the history and embed that into New Murabba. So when we talk about, as I say, mobility, getting around, we talk about the elements of having that privacy but being part of community, because community is enormous here in the kingdom, and family is enormous, and friendship is really, really compelling. So we have to make sure that we're not just delivering assets, we're creating a place. And it's a place that's worthy of being part of Riyadh. But when it comes to livability, you know, to be able to actually access New Murabba, get around New Murabba in any different number of modes. So we have 6 different modes of transport, all of which are interconnected with the city, interconnected with the airport, which means that it's a very quick pass-through to either get to New Murabba from the airport, to pass on through down to, to Kaft, or indeed to then head on out to Qidr in the fullness of time. So mobility is really key. I think the second thing is to say that the urbanicity will change. So it will anchor upon the look and feel of Riyadh today, but it will be applied to a new urban code. So Riyadh today is a city which has a relatively low density. It has a relatively low level of build, with the exception of some large buildings in this area.
Yeah, Mr. Tucker Carlson was very appreciative of that, if you heard his previous session, keeping everything low.
So what we're trying to do is to actually inject that sort of downtown feel that we have so many benchmarks from around the world, but not make it unlivable, but to make it livable. So we're very fortunate because actually we have this most amazing piece of space that is actually empty at the point that we arrived, which means we have the ability to create a city that's born smart. I'm from London, and I think that 350 years, 80% of the streets have been where they are. So if you were to walk in London with no shoes on, you would feel the pavements are warm even in the winter, because there are so many pipes and wires in the ground giving off ambient heat. The reality with what we have here is we have the ability to create corridors, passages, areas, space for future expansion that we won't use today, but we know that will be necessary tomorrow for cooling, for heating, for all of those things. So we have the ability to get ahead of this, learning from the experiences of the past. And ultimately, when you take any of the measures of livability, I think right now we show up very well with our benchmarking against some of the most well talked about cities in the world. But I think what will be really interesting will be 2 things. One is New Murabba will have a characteristic of mid and high level living. so in apartments and condos, which is something that is new at scale in Riyadh. So that's one thing which creates an opportunity, which creates this livability aspect. And above and beyond that, the density of people within Murabba will be in the order of sort of 20,000 people per square kilometre compared to 4,000 today. But actually 20,000 benchmarks quite well against the top livable cities in the world.
Absolutely.
So we're creating this real nucleus of something different, where we're anchored to Riyadh, but we'll be very different, but we're directly connected. And ultimately, you'll be able to pass seamlessly through from Riyadh today into Riyadh tomorrow. And you won't know the difference. The only thing I hope is that little things like internet zips a bit faster, wayfinding is a bit easier, signage above roads and highways is that little bit more intuitive, all of those things.
And really integrated, which I love. And by the way, I wouldn't recommend anybody walks barefoot in London in the winter. Can I just say that was not being endorsed by Mr. Michael Dyke here on stage at the RFF. I don't think either of us would really recommend it. You talk about community centricity and how all of these things have been very much designed from the ground up, and this idea that it's not retrofitted, it's not coming at it from the perspective of we're going to build something, or what should we make it?
Yes.
But I do know that something which is a bit the flagship icon as part of New Murabba is something you've just alluded to earlier, which is called the Murabba. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, I mean, it blew my mind when I heard about it, and I would love you to tell our interested audience today exactly what this is and what it means for the New Murabba project.
Okay, look, Murabba is unique. What I can share with you today is the fundamentals of Murabba. What I can also share is that we're still defining precisely what will be inside Murabba. But Murabba is a structure. It will be, pound for pound, I think, the world's most complex structure ever created, known to man or woman in the history of time.
Sorry,
Now,
can you just say that again, slowly?
I think the most complex structure ever known to man or woman in the history of time. And that's something I don't say lightly. Now, people can take reference points from elsewhere and say, what about this, what about that? But if I said to you, look, we have a structure which is 400 meters by 400 by 400 meters above the ground. Now, if you think Riyadh is already 700 meters above sea level, so we're talking about a structure which will extend to more than 1,000 meters above sea level. That's the first thing. But as much as we talk about Murabba above the ground, below the ground is enormous as well. It's a complete cavernous labyrinth of various different asset classes. So as one example, the retail under Murabba and around Murabba is the size of Dubai Mall today and can be capable of extending to be bigger. So that's just a small example of what you don't see because it's under the ground. But if we talk about Murabba itself, fundamentally, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince had an amazing vision to say that Murabba would represent a gateway to another world.
Yes.
So when you think about what does that really mean, well, if we took at the physicality today says that we will have something like 2 to 3 Empire State Buildings on each corner, which anchor the 4 corners of Murabba. We will have a dome, which will be something in the order of about 360,000 square meters, which will be 380 meters high by 340 meters in diameter, inside what effectively is the equivalent of Empire State Buildings. We will then put a tower in the center of it, which will be the only skyscraper in the world that lives inside another building, which will be an equivalent size of the Eiffel Tower, but will be fully inhabited. Which means there will be 500 hospitality keys, there will be 27,000 people moving around the lower levels of the tower at any point in time. And then we put the world's largest roof on the top at 16 hectares, which will be a fully living and accessible roof. So you start to think about that, and just the ability to do this, to do that, and to do that is something quite unique. And what that means is we have very natural challenges that we step through because we have great engineers. So the building can't breathe out because it doesn't breathe out to the atmosphere, so it has to breathe down and out. So its lungs are at the bottom, just as an example. But above and beyond that, we have maintained a really strong nod to the heritage of Riyadh by having effectively a Najdi facade. So the facade will be a fully activated facade, but it is the most beautiful Najdi facade that talks back to the architectural history of the kingdom. But equally inside Murabba, inside the dome, will be an immersive experience that has never been seen at this scale ever in the history of time. And when you step into the Murabba, you will step into another world, literally. So what that means is that when you are inside the dome, you will be transported to other worlds, The worlds will change frequently, and you will not be able to see the dome when you're inside it because of the technology that we're creating. And all of that is brought together with an enormous amount of technology layers to create the sense of being in another world. And we're then applying that to hospitality, to retail, and to entertainment when you step through the portals and you're inside the dome. So that's a small example of Murabba.
Just a small example, and he said he was taking on just a small challenge, but it sounds quite like an extraordinary and very, very visionary challenge to me. I love some of what you've just been talking about, which is this maintenance of sort of the history and the heritage and the legacy and the cultural significance of this iconographic building and structures that you're creating. But also, there's a huge amount of technology at play here, and you've described it as walking into, literally entering another world.
Yes.
How are you achieving that? What sort of technologies are you integrating in order to give people that sensation? And how are you aligning that with maintaining the cultural, I suppose, honesty of the roots of this project?
Yes. So the reality is that we are, I think, learning more about Murabba every day. That's a simple fact. We are learning about the solutions and the ways to overcome some of the wicked technological challenges, because they really are on a different level. But at the same time, we have the best engineers in the world, from the west coast of the US through Europe to the Far East, all focused on the immersive technology first and foremost. The difference with the immersive technology here compared to something which is amazing but relatively straightforward in Las Vegas in the Sphere is that when you are sitting in the Sphere, you feel like you're in a different place, but you're in a fixed location, which means that it's a relatively straightforward engineering challenge to fix the perspective. We have the challenge of enabling 27,000 people to move in any direction, anytime, anywhere, go where they want to go. And also we have to deal with the perspective issue. So if you're at the top, what you would see at human scale at the bottom can't look at the same scale. So we're dealing with perspective and horizon fade, which are two big challenges technically. But we have the best engineers on the planet working on that. Above and beyond that, then the challenge becomes something we see every day in life, physical and digital convergence. It's happening all the time. AI, we know, is moving at such a pace. We've seen again this week, yet another huge leap forward in China. And what we have to do is to work out what happens when the digital meets the physical in Murabba on a particular element. So when I talk about retail as an example, we'll be creating retail of another world, something people can't even conceive today.
Yeah.
But what we know is that the best retailers and the best organizations that will occupy these spaces have high ambition to present their brands and their capabilities in the most extreme way. So we have the most amazing backdrop to say, what's the fusion when those two things come together? That's what we're working on right now, to actually understand what happens when the magic hits and what happens there. But it will be like something you haven't seen. Now, above and beyond that, what I would say is that where we get physical and digital convergence in the world today, what tends to happen is we rush as human beings to see that thing there.
Yeah.
So we go to the Far East, we suddenly go to the US, we go to Europe. Imagine all of that under one roof. Imagine the latest of everything drawn magnetically under one roof to the largest stage in the world. That's what will be special about Murabba.
Wow, magical, you said, and I think that's a great word for it. And there are lots of things on the horizon as well for the project, not least of which is a link with the FIFA 2034 World Cup.
Yes.
And our previous panel was just talking about events and hospitality and sport and things like that. So would you like to share a little bit about how New Murabba is going to play its part in potentially some things that are happening with FIFA 2034?
Of course. Firstly, we are privileged and fortunate that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince selected New Murabba as one of the host stadiums, and I think we do have, pound for pound, a very unique offering which is modelled around the acacia tree, but our stadium looks nothing like a stadium. And I think that's actually, in fairness, one of the characteristics across the whole kingdom. So we're not special, but I think we are different in terms of the look and feel of our place. So we're very excited about 2034. It was interesting listening to your last panelist. As of today, we have 2,071 days to go until the 1st of October 2030, which is when New Murabba goes live. And that will be the point at which Expo kicks in, and that's just under 50,000 hours, which means we can do a lot in 50,000 hours. That's the mindset we must have. And then, clearly beyond that, with something like 2 years of time, we need to be ready in 2032 for FIFA to take up occupancy, to be ready for 2034. So, as you can probably gauge from this conversation, we are fiercely focused on creating an amazing place and the best experience, but we're also anchored in the reality of the outcome at the end and working back from there, which was what your speaker was saying earlier.
Yeah.
So for us, I think the advent of the World Cup coming to Murabba is fitting because it will be a place that will be hosting hundreds of thousands of Saudis living in Murabba. It will be a place where I believe international citizens will be living at Murabba. It's the world's largest modern downtown, therefore ultimately really must have a place which is worthy of a FIFA stadium. Above and beyond that, we're working very closely with many parts of the kingdom to establish other anchor assets that will be around the estate. As you might imagine, we have all the things you would expect, technology, university, museum, and so on. But I think what's really interesting and exciting is how do we combine potentially the FIFA stadium with a multi-purpose arena that can actually be scaled up or scaled down to host many different concerts or events over time. But again, everything we are doing is done with the mindset of being built to last.
And it's also being done with the mindset of being built with one eye very firmly on the future and being one of these models of a future city. And therefore, sustainability and the green objective must be clearly at the heart of everything you're doing from this stage forward, I would imagine.
Yes, it is. I mean, we have very strong sustainability credentials, and it's more than just words. We have very strong ESG credentials too. And we took a very conscious decision at the beginning of last year when we were formulating those strategies to say that, for example, our position statement simply on sustainability is we will consider it in every decision we take.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to say, but it's really important to do. And one thing we know in life is, and over the last 20 years in particular, when sustainability has really come to the fore, is that sustainable decisions are long-term decisions. They're not short-term decisions. Sustainable long-term decisions don't always fit with short-term economic cycles or business planning cycles. So I think where we're very fortunate in Murabba is we're able to take a long-term view on part of Riyadh, which will be there for generations to come, and to be able to take those non-regret decisions early. So that's really key. We have all the normal characteristics you'd expect of a sustainable city. So, we focus heavily upon the reduction of carbon. We focus heavily upon renewables. We focus heavily upon smart technology to enable people to have that sort of either just in time or only on when necessary type of mindset. I think one of the challenges we face, but one of the opportunities we have, is to help to raise awareness of just being more sustainable within Saudi Arabia. And we see fantastic examples of it in pockets. But I think today more work is required to bring it into the psyche day to day. But if you think about it, smart tech, which is either available on your cell phone or beyond your cell phone by 2030, is going to be key because people take action based upon awareness.
Yes.
And they drive behaviors based upon understanding.
Absolutely.
So therefore, for us, again, we have this ability to paint a picture over the next 5 to 6 years before our first residents take up their positions, to actually explain what it means to be sustainable in Murabba and to use it as a catalyst for the wider Riyadh and the kingdom. We will have all of the normal things, but we'll have extra really smart things such as refuse collection will be smart, decibel level monitoring on sound will be smart, and all of the above, but it will all be at the literally touch of a fingertip through an enabled app or otherwise.
Michael, I could talk to you all day, and there is so much more still that we could explore, but sadly our time is coming to an end. So that was a lovely segue, talking about sort of legacy and what you're trying to embed for this future process of building and real estate. I understand a lot of what you're trying to achieve with this project. It's extraordinary, it's absolutely visionary, and it's so ambitious, and that will have a legacy in and of itself. But is there anything that you'd like in this room here today, people to potentially see or take from the way that New Murabba is being designed and built? Would you like that to be part of its legacy, that this icon of innovation can influence the way that we do many other projects and that we design and build cities of the future?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we're fortunate. And not many places have the good fortune that we have by having a blank campus, firstly. Secondly, we're really well positioned geographically because we're connected to Riyadh today, but we have great proximity and access to the airport and to the center parts of Riyadh today, be it the financial district or the like. So in my mind, being innovative, but being sustainable and being long-term in your thinking is really crucial. And actually, being clear about outcomes rather than obsessing around outputs is a really important shift, I think, in mindset. At Murabba, we obsess around inputs and outcomes.
Okay.
That's what we do, rather than obsessing around inputs and outputs, because outputs happen, but outcomes require real thought. And therefore, if we can be clear about our outcomes and we can focus absolutely on the inputs, we can start to create the hard wiring between what needs to happen to turn that input and that effort and that energy into an outcome. And I think outcome-wise, when you talk about legacy, we want to have a place which is worthy of being in Riyadh. We say it's worthy of Riyadh.
Yeah.
And that's no small ask. It's an enormous ask. And it starts with the first communities that we conceive, we think about how it is to function in those communities, what they look and feel like, and how it will be to just be part of it. Do you get privacy? Do you get community? Is it really that easy? So that's an outcome. So therefore, we obsess around the input. So I think being clear about outcomes there. Likewise, inside Murabba, the outcome is to be transported to another world. So it's something that's easy to say, and it's very hard to define, but we know that by focusing on inputs and posing questions around outcomes, that becomes clearer. And when you bring all of that together, a really important outcome for me is actually the pride of the kingdom, feeling that Murabba is a worthy part of the heritage in time of the kingdom. You know, I've traveled a little, but not as much as I want in my first sort of year and a half or so of visiting. But, you know, you go to Alula and then you feel very small. You feel like you're the speck in time, and you look at the history and the heritage, and it's incredible. You know, what's happening at the Red Sea is frankly amazing.
Yes.
And again, you think, you know, you're fortunate just to experience that bit, but there are so many other parts of the kingdom. As an outcome, I would aspire for Murabba to be thought about in that way, not today, not tomorrow, but in the medium to long term. And if we can just simply arrive, we can create a place, not just a group of assets, and we can fill that place with thriving, excited, energized young Saudis, I think we will have done an okay job. And ultimately, it will stand the test of time. But one thing that's really important to me is to say that whatever we do, it can't be done just based upon the design parameters of today. And what I mean by that is, when you entertain large, complex assets, they have, say, a 125-year design life. But my question would be, when will the Empire State Building ever be pulled down? And the answer is never. So therefore, when we think about defining, designing, and ultimately creating Murabba, it has to be something that will be built to last for hundreds of years, which means that we mustn't take short-term decisions today. We've got to think about long-term outcomes to ensure that Murabba is capable of doing whatever society requires it to do in 300 and 400 years' time.
So that evolution.
Not just what's required by 2030, 2040, 2050. So real outcome focus, but ultimately I want the kingdom, and I really want the people of Saudi Arabia to feel proud about Murabba. That would be the best possible legacy.
Well, thank you so much for your vision, your ambition, the role that you're playing in bringing this extraordinary icon to life. I've been incredibly inspired by our conversation. We're very lucky to have you here today. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, and it's given you some real food for thought for the way that we plan, develop, build, design into the future, and yeah, maybe challenge us all to have even more ambition and learn a bit from what Murabba is hoping to achieve as an icon within Riyadh. Please show your great appreciation now for Mr. Michael Dyke, CEO of Murabba.